Okay, 1 second. Let me do this. Let's record it. And Dan, I'm going to go ahead and count you down here. And count you down at 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the Gray Stage, episode number 9 of the podcast. This is a review of the book by Greg Fernandez Jr. called The Gray Stage. This is episode number 9. We'll be covering chapter 5 today, called The Living Room. For those of you with the book in your possession, we'll be on page 43. This is Dan Hennen. Joining me is Catherine Michelle and Greg Fernandez Jr. How are you guys doing?
Doing great, thanks.
Loving life.
Well, this is the fourth part of The Living Room. This is one of the biggest and most important chapters of your book, Greg, and we've done part 1, 2, and 3, and today's episode will finish up with episode 4. There's just so much to cover with the blood, the writing on the wall, the knife, the blood on the floor. It's just there's so much to cover, and hopefully we'll wrap up today with some interesting things. Anyone have anything to add, or should I just start off with the reading of the first section?
I say go for it. Go ahead and start reading.
All right. The Quran connection. A Quran, item 4, was found in the living room floor, open to page 995. Of the several Quran torn Quran pages found in the living room floor, only 3 pages with bloodstains were labeled and submitted to the laboratory. Item 5, Item 6, and Item 10. 2 of these pages, items 5 and 6, were found next to David. Item 6 was found under brown fabric, in quotes. The other item, item 10, was found on the opposite side end of the living room floor next to Camille. And then we see the image in the book of the artist's rendition of the investigator's drawing. Looking at the top of page 44, looking at the BCA lab results, the Quran and the 3 pages were not tested and not mentioned further. In fact, the Quran was barely mentioned in the Apple Valley police reports. Initially, aside from the one image of the living room wall, all mention of the blood writing, the Quran, and the note in the office bedroom were redacted from police reports. Even when the Quran was mentioned in BCA documents, it was simply referred to as a book. So that's the first section. And what are our comments there for this Quran? You know, once again, it's not mentioned in the police reports, and it's very briefly mentioned, and when it is, it's redacted in the public reports.
Yeah, I was going through the crime scene photos, and the Quran is not inside of any of the Apple Valley police photos that we got. Technically, they did include this one that I have up on our screen now, but you'll notice that this is a BCA. This is BCA 4755. So when we got the original, 400 photos, 494 photos, the Quran was not in there. And again, no mention of any of the pages being torn out or anything like that. Now we know that they were trying to hide this from the public view. I think if this would have came out, if the Quran stuff would have came out when the bodies were found, I think there would have been a lot more questions, a lot more speculation. There was a ton of speculation, obviously, starting with what the police did and what they saw and what the neighbors saw. But, you know, I think I have a hard time justifying why they would hide such a crucial thing and then at the same time try to make David Crowley look guilty. Wouldn't this, or look crazy, sorry, wouldn't this help them make the case that David Crowley was crazy?
I see it differently. I see that if they were to bring this out into the forefront, it actually disproves their case quite a bit. And the reason why I say that is because a lot of people make reference to where the Quran was open, yet they don't explain how the pages were randomly ripped out, folded, shredded, put all over the floor, underneath the Quran, underneath David, and yet somehow David supposedly did this, and then there's body pieces and skull pieces on top of the Quran. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. To me, the fact that it sits there screams that someone else could and should and probably was involved, should have been investigated, as I should say. You know, and I see that they don't want to bring that out because they can't explain it. It doesn't fit the narrative.
Any idea why some of the pages are itemized, just 3 of the pages, and not some of the other pages? There's a page that I'm going to go back to here. We're going to look at BCA 4756, and this is next to the Quran, very, very close, and you can see what Catherine was just talking about. The page is folded here. There does look like a little rip kind of in the right-hand side. But this particular page is not itemized. And so I was just kind of wondering, why are some of the pages not included, not tested, especially this one, because you can clearly see this is right underneath David's hand here. So David's hand go ahead.
This is Dan. I've got a comment. Maybe we can get someone to comment on this as well, someone with a background in forensics and investigations. With me not having one, all I can do is look into other things in the investigation. There was a spiral notebook in David's office, and there, whether the pages were blank or not, they itemized each and every single page of the notebook. Now, I know with a 1,000-page Quran, that's not going to happen. So I can only suspect that they had to pick the pages that were deemed pertinent, perhaps. And so that's maybe why they just took those 3 or 4 pages and did those. Now, I'm not sure why they didn't do the rest, but is that what you would conclude, Catherine, as far as how they decided or picked and choose which ones they itemized?
That would make a little bit of sense, yes. I think that is a plausible theory. However, it's interesting, like Greg was saying, the pages they actually chose to document. It doesn't make sense to me in the sense that there are other pages that I think I would have looked at and would have tested for fingerprints, for blood, to see whose it was, blah, 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 but it really wasn't done. But yes, I agree that, that is plausible. However, I still see that there's a lot of problems with this Quran being on the floor.
So you're suggesting perhaps 9 or 10 pages would have been itemized and tested, something to that effect, a handful of other ones, rather than just randomly 3.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. And now for those new to the case as well, some of our newer members, these are the only 3 items that relate to the Muslim faith in this investigation. Is that notepad signed "Submit to Allah now," the blood writing on the wall that says "Allahu Akbar," and the Quran at the scene. Those things are the only 3 things really that related at all to the Muslim faith. And the family, Camille's family, did suggest or recommend to authorities that those things not be made public. So I think back to our earlier question, that could relate to possibly why those things were redacted or even minimalized or not mentioned as much in the public. But you're right. If this was all out in the public on day one, this would have been a whole different, a wider spectrum investigation. Whereas the family didn't know about this till I think the month of March. In fact, this was all there when the family came up to visit the crime scene, and then it wasn't really made public till the following January of 2016 when the Fox 9 News investigators broke this story about the blood writing on the wall, the Quran, and the mention of a loss. So it's very strange that I could see those things being redacted, but in many cases in your book, Greg, you mentioned that they were even minimalized. They were not even mentioned, or it did not go into great detail on some of these things. Not only redacting it, but not spending a lot of time on the Quran, which could have been very huge. With it was meant to be, I think, in the staging of the scene, it was meant to be a huge deal at the scene. That's why it was placed there and whatnot. But looks like they picked 3 pages, submitted them for testing, and moved on with other things.
I think goes along
with what goes on with the rest of the case, where it was all just quickly swept under the table, and we have our man David did it. But all these things, once again, do not point to that. Go ahead, Kathleen.
I think you hit on an extremely important point, and that is that the Quran and the writing and the little note that was scribbled on the pad was meant to be the big factor in the case. And yet it was completely downplayed and minimized. So that, I had not thought about that, but the moment you said that, it just made a whole lot of sense. That it doesn't make sense why they minimalized it, but yes, the fact that I really think it was supposed to steer the narrative of the police officers in a whole different direction that they didn't even go.
Yeah, I agree.
You think that would be towards somebody else, towards someone other than David doing this, especially with one of the pages, a couple pages underneath his left hand? Do you think this was meant to steer them to think that David Crowley just went crazy?
Well, a lot of people that have contacted me personally, and plus some comments I've seen on the group, is when they see this, they really go along with the lines of an honor killing and want to blame Camille's family. And that bothers me, because I'm like, this doesn't scream honor killing, and to drag them into the middle of this would be horrible. But yet they were, because personally for me, in my opinion, I don't think her family had anything to do with this. Just my opinion only. But yeah, I don't know.
And Greg, I don't know necessarily, this is Dan, I don't know necessarily if it was to blame or point the guilt at another person. I think it was just simply added to add another layer of confusion to, I think, really just, once again, like Catherine said, now we've got the possibility that maybe Camille's family is involved. Maybe it was an honor killing. Maybe someone, killed this family because she married a white Christian man, and so it was added, it was inserted. Let me say that it was inserted. I think these 3 things to cause that next layer of chaos, I think, and confusion. And it was already, you get a homicide like this in a city of Apple Valley that averages one homicide per year. Now you get a triple homicide, and you insert this. This was already way over the heads of anything that these current investigators had ever even dealt with. And so I think that was part of it too, to really confuse and stymie these amateur, officially they're professional detectives, but not much experience as far as dealing with any type of homicide or murder killing, much less in an Islamic slant to it, and a possible the whole other thing. I think it just went way over their heads, and I think it made it. They wanted to create the wow factor for these detectives to say, okay, we have no clue what's going on here. And once again, we know that this is a staged scene, and it's staged on purpose. And in typical cases like this, the less the better. A single gunshot wounds to the head, you would have automatically suspected a hired hit or actual homicide, followed by a suicide. But that they went so far to add these other features that I think really makes it look just ridiculous is what it does. And but now why what they did in the public was minimalize it. The reports, they minimalized it, and I don't know. I can't answer that. Maybe they didn't want to go there. Maybe it was up over their heads, or maybe if this was a cover up, that they just stayed out of it because it did add that whole other layer of question, which they didn't want, because if their goal was to sweep this case under the carpet as quickly as they could, it's one less thing to bring up.
Right.
So I don't know, but those are just the thoughts that came into my head as far as why they have all this extra. To me, it also means that the killer or killers had time to set up this and had time to stage, and were not worried about being discovered or caught. We're not worried about being, someone knocking on the door or police cars or sirens coming. They had the whole place to themselves. They were in no rush or no hurry to do any of this.
Yep.
So once again, the staging, the key thing to remember with the staging is that they had the time and the wherewithal to spend as much time as they needed to get it looking and set up the way they wanted. It was not an in and out quick murder, escape through the back sliding door and running off into the night. I mean, this is where we get back into the silencer was used, or the people were killed at a different location altogether. There was no urgency by the killers in this case to quickly wrap up and leave. They were busy spending time with all this nonsense.
Dan, when you spoke with Camille's dad, because I think one of the big questions that I still have, it's still kind of unclear to me exactly when Camille's family found out about the Quran, about the blood writing. We know it was at least one month later. It seems like, according to the police reports, the family did not know about it until then. When you spoke with Camille's dad, did that ever come up? Did you guys ever talk about the Quran or any of the Muslim stuff? Let me ask you this. Did you even know about it at that time when you spoke with Camille's dad?
I don't know if I did. Now, it certainly didn't come up because we were just talking on a very high level about the murders and crimes and the whole situation. So I didn't bring it up, but that's a good point. We didn't know about it till the following January, so maybe it hadn't even been known about. But the father of Camille, named Anjum, was just still, beside himself. His focus was his ill wife that was in hospice care, essentially, for cancer, and he was focusing on her, and they didn't even let her know about the triple homicide in Apple Valley, Minnesota, because they are based near Waco, Texas. And so the sister, Sidra, knew and was dealing with basically most of the police investigations over the phone, along with her father, Anjum. When it came time to fly up to Minneapolis to meet with investigators, Anjum still stayed home, and just Sidra came. And I believe that flight, that time was, that meeting was March 11th or the 13th, or sometime in the middle of March of 2015. And keep in mind, the bodies were discovered of January 17th. So it was coming up on 2 months before they were even told about this scenario, is how I took it.
Interesting.
And then at that point, they said, keep this out of the media. And so I don't know, the timing of all that is very particular, but it sounds like this is all news to them as well.
Maybe a little bit off topic, but how did Camille's dad sound? Was he really down? Did he sound stressed? Did you get any reading about, like, anything in his voice? Was he upbeat? He seemed like he was very open and honest to chat with you about it.
Well, he had been, I think, obviously following the case, or even the pages, even though the justice page on Facebook, even though he was still working full time with his own business and then caring for his wife. And so the two things that stuck out for me was, him when he mentioned to me that if money was not a problem, he would hire his own private investigator to look into this because it didn't make sense to him. So he also, right off the bat, didn't believe the official narrative and said that this is just way too bizarre. The other thing is that he said he spent their time, preventing the mother from finding out. And so that was their real stress about the case and the uncertainty. The other feeling I got too is that the families between the Alams and the Crowleys were not, at odds, but they were not on very good terms. I think they were asking several things and trying to work together as both families together to get some of this solved. And the Crowleys, which means Dan Sr. and Dan Jr., those side of the family was not very forthcoming on some of these things. Even with the ashes of the cremation for little Rania, it took several years, I think, for those ashes to finally be mailed and delivered down to a final resting spot in Texas, because they were sitting in Dan Crowley Sr.'s home, evidently because they didn't want to pay the shipping charges to mail it down there or something. So the families were not on good terms besides. But Anjum, I got the sense, and I talked to him in August, I think, of 2015. And so this is several months later. He did not trust the whole thing, and it didn't make sense to him, and he wanted to, if he had nothing else going on, hire his own detective or detectives to look into what really happened here, because he didn't buy it. And then, like I said, he was having issues with dealing and communicating with the Crowley family. It was about this time that I don't think we even knew it yet, but this was around the time when I talked to him that they found the body of Kate Crowley dead in her home in Owatonna, Minnesota, which was David's mother. And so all this was all going on just 7 months after the bodies were discovered.
It's crazy.
Yeah, so I think we found out about the Quran and the Islamic slant to this in January of 2016, and so we were not even known about this when I did reach out and contact Anjum, the father. So that wouldn't have even come up.
And I guess there was some agreement between Eric Nelson, who ended up making a sloppy-mentary about this case, and Tom Lydon, that they were going to release this information at the same time, and for whatever reason, Tom Lydon released it before their agreed-upon time. And so there's some cracks there with these guys holding on to this stuff and trying to make money off of it and trying to profit from it instead of putting it out there and letting the people decide what they think. And I really think if this information would have came out a lot sooner, I think a lot of people who don't question this story now or don't even look at it now, looked at it for a couple months and then moved on, especially in those first 4 or 5 months. There was a lot of questions. I really think that if this information had come out earlier, if these people had not held on to this and hid it from the public view, I think there would be a lot more people that would realize David Crowley is not guilty.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Greg. In talking with the lead detective, James Gummert, in the Apple Valley Police Department front lobby there, when I spoke to him, he was upset and frustrated in the fact that the Fox 9 News team released all of the information to the public about the Islamic angle when they themselves had a off-the-cuff agreement, I guess, to kind of leave that until we all agree on when we can do that, and they essentially, agreed to do that. And then on the news, the breaking news, Fox 9 broke all that, and so that created the bad blood between the news station, Fox 9 News in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the Apple Valley Police Department. So there was a lot of black clouds hanging around this investigation all along the way. A lot of distrust between all of the various different elements. The Gray State Project, the guys working on the Gray State Project were going through a division within themselves. The families were at a division. The news were at a division. The law enforcement, various agencies weren't necessarily telling the truth, and things were being done behind the scenes too. So there was this whole set of dishonesty and no one really trusting each other on a case like this is what adds, which I would say compounds, maybe that's a better word, this already nasty case. It just adds to it.
Now, for the Quran, I mean, we've kind of covered this here. The Quran was not tested. These pages were not tested. They were submitted to be tested, but for whatever reason, they were collected, I should say, but they're not here. I mean, if anything, I would think that the Quran should have been tested. There's clearly blood on it. So why wasn't that tested to see whose blood was on it? We can assume, because they tested the blood wall, this should be Camille's blood. It should be only Camille's blood. So I don't know what the difficulty. I have no idea, you know, what that would involve. Testing blood, testing paper like this for blood, but I was shocked when I learned that they did not do any tests on any of these items, and these are very important items, obviously, because they collected them. I'm assuming the ones that they collected, 5, 6, and 10, the pages should have all had blood on them, and that's why they collected them. I'm pretty sure I could pull that up right here and see.
Yeah, and while you're doing that, I want to have another comment that maybe Catherine could contribute on as well, because I'd like to get her view on this. What we never heard, Greg, you know, we get the testing, we see the hair, we see the torn out pages on the Quran, the blood, what page it's open to, allegedly a prayer, a forgiveness prayer, but at the same time they say, you know, the dog was rummaging around through there and could have kicked over the pages, so we don't know if it was intentionally laid on that page or not. My question is, and this is to this day, whose Quran was it? Was it David's? It was never said. Was it Camille's? It was never said. Was it planted at the scene? Was it neither of theirs? Now, all that we know is two things. Camille and her family were Muslim. She was Muslim at one time, and perhaps still was, so that would make sense that she would have one at least in the house. David, in the research that he did with all of his homework and his intellectual level, a high IQ, I'll call it, he had various religious books of all sorts of religions, whether he believed them or not. He was very well read, which can conclude, I believe, that he possibly had a Quran that he also owned. Doesn't mean he was a Muslim who had an issue with the faith, so it could have been his. But nowhere do we see in a typical Bible that I'm used to, and I come from a Christian background, you would have it presented to, or a name in the front, or given as a gift, or you'd have your name in that front cover or something. Was that front cover ever opened up, and was it addressed to someone? Did someone own it? Was it given as a gift? That, to me, would have been a very simple thing, to open that front cover up and take a picture for the investigators to identify, number one, whose it was. And that being missing, I think, is very interesting, because we still can't rule out the fact that that Quran was placed at the scene, and neither of them, you know, perhaps there was no Quran in that house, that neither of those two owned a Quran. And why was it there? So those are the three options. Catherine, what's your thoughts on that?
Oh, you have said a mouthful. I agree. I mean, I agree with all of that. And the fact that they didn't open it up, they didn't even, there isn't, as far as I know, a picture of even the front cover. There are pictures missing, because with the amount of blood that is on the side of the pages, so that means that, you know, as they're trying to open it, I would assume that's how the blood then transferred on to where you see it would have to transfer. So there would have to be a good amount of blood on the front and the back of the jacket of that book. But yet there wasn't, and maybe even fingerprints, right? Latent prints in blood, but nothing was photographed. Yeah, and it bothers me too, the random pages that are pulled out and scattered. So the narrative that I'm trying to see that just doesn't fit with what the scene is saying is that David just randomly pulled pages out here and there, dropped them right there next to where he was at, and then opened it to a specific page and then laid down and put his hand there. I mean, nothing of that scene and where that book is and where those pages are makes sense or fits. Did I answer your question?
Yes. And the other thing from those who have been in our group, we've got nearly 3,800 members in the Justice for David Crowley and Family Facebook group. Those that are joined, and many of them are from the Middle East and many countries, including Pakistan and Iran, Iraq, and all sorts of Middle Eastern countries. They have said that you would never, ever put a Quran on the floor in the first place. It would never, ever be sitting on the floor.
Exactly. Didn't Russell I'm sorry to keep trying to interrupt you, but didn't Russell cover that in one of your interviews? And he said the same exact thing.
That was the first thing. You would never desecrate that in that manner. So once again, whoever staged it didn't know that and didn't think of that. And that's, I think, where they're getting caught up or tripped up on the staging of this, is because how poorly it was done. That's very offensive. What they did there was very offensive to those of the religion. That's a very offensive thing to do. All of those things. Blood writing on the wall. It's Allah Akbar, written in English. Remember, it's written in English.
Mm-hmm.
Should have been written in Arabic on the wall. So, when have you ever, or those listening to this broadcast, have ever seen the words Allah Akbar written in English anywhere?
Yeah, let alone
proclamation.
Yes, exactly, and especially let alone in blood. I mean, blood is considered an unclean type of thing, in our understanding. It, like you stated, everything that was done to the Quran violated not only the book, but insulted their religion. I mean, it would be like to us, if someone did that to a Bible, we would just be like, oh, wait a second, how could you do that? Because it's considered holy scripture. And to them, this is their holy scripture. So why? It doesn't make sense. There's nothing about David's character, snapped or unsnapped, according to what the police said, that puts him in a mindset as to desecrate anybody's religion in this way. Now, he may or may not have agreed or believed. I don't know. None of my business. That's between him and God. But there's nothing that I have ever seen in his character that would go this far as to rip apart this book and desecrate it in the way it's been desecrated. And then how does it randomly end up on this page when this dog is supposedly running through this house? The dog, now, according to the police, have moved 3 bodies and could, do all kinds of stuff and could eat all these bones and could, tear apart all this stuff. And yet somehow David left this page open right here on the Quran and the dog never touched it. It's like, come on.
Yeah, the other thing as far as the narrative is pushing is that it's opened up to a common forgiveness prayer. Now, with the Quran, much like the Bible, open to any page of it at all, one could find or speculate something that resembles a prayer of forgiveness, a forgiveness prayer or something to that effect. So there could be one on almost every page. So the fact that that is mentioned leads us to believe, too, that it was, said that way, or the statement was crafted that way. Now, if blood was found that didn't belong to the Crowleys, as what we're potentially thinking here as part of the cover-up, those would be reasons that then they would not be tested or responded, or maybe not. There was the photograph not taken of the inside cover showing who owned this things. If it didn't push or strengthen the narrative, they wouldn't have included it in the report if, in fact, this was a cover-up by the Apple Valley Police. Because we know they would have opened the front cover, they would have maybe taken a photo or not. But the fact that those things are not in here means were they selectively removed because they didn't paint the story that was warranted. That's my question. I'd like to know, who owned the Quran, and where is the photograph of the inside cover of this book? And now, so for elementary investigator detectives, class 101, that'd be something that you would take. So we know that they looked at the front cover and they looked at the front and back and saw the blood. The question is, why was no photo of the inside front cover of who it belonged to inserted into the reports? That's my question. That's, and like what Greg was listening to too, listing, if there's 10 or 12 pages, why wouldn't all 10 or 12 be inserted into the report and itemized? If 9 of those pages had someone else's blood other than David's and Camille's on there, and only 3 of them have David and Camille's, those are the 3 that presented, once again, it lines up with the story. So
right,
we get back to this completeness, this level of completeness. If there's 12 pages torn out, why wouldn't all 12 examine it? Why only 3? And so what happened to the other 9, for instance? And so that's the question, is an investigation like this, we can't look at what was in the investigation or in the reports, but also what's more importantly not included or what's missing. So
right.
I think Greg has a good point there.
I mean, you both bring up excellent points. And, if they had tested this blood, because as far as we know, it was never tested, but if the blood on this Quran comes back to be David's, they have a huge problem. The entire theory of David did this is straight out the window. So did they not test it to CYA? Or did they not test it for multiple reasons? And I agree with you. Why didn't they take a picture of the inside cover? Why didn't they take a picture of the outside where there's got to be obviously blood, some type of fingerprints, palm prints in blood on the covers on the outside? I mean, they took a photo of the gun magazine when they pulled it out of the gun, and there is a latent print with a very good ridge detail, which in the latent processing, and I know this is off topic, but then they say there's not enough detail and they can't figure out whose print that is. And I'm calling BS on that all over the place. I mean, we see great ridge detail. So what detail are they missing, and did they miss on this Quran by not doing their job? And again, I agree with you in the speculation as to why. The question, why, not speculation, but why didn't they do that?
Now, is it possible that they did, and that's just more of the photos that we didn't get?
It would have to be documented.
Yeah.
When you look at everything that was sent to the BCA lab, they list everything that was taken to be tested. And there's emails back and forth. What do you want tested? What do you not want tested? And there's no mention of the Quran or the pages, correct? Not that I've seen.
Yeah, you're right. No, you're right on that. And because they when Camille's sister, when they talk with her, it sounds like they give her this book, which is kind of weird too, which it's all bloody and everything and whatever, but they give her this book, and it kind of sounds like she identifies it as her sister's. So that would make me think that they had no idea whose Quran this was. Even if they did open that front page, from whatever they had, they were not able to conclude whose Quran this was. So I think that is a very excellent point. Very, very good point there.
Yeah.
Let's see. Only other thing I have on the Quran. Let's see. I think I only have one other thing here about the Quran, and that is, number 10. I wanted to pull up the image here somewhere. I had it. That kind of shows, how far number 10 is from everyone else. So, looking at the DNA. Looking at these swabs, if they've only took 3 pages, items 5, 6, and 10, and all of those do have blood on them, can we assume that all of the other torn out pages don't have blood on them? And if they don't have blood on them, that's, it gets even weirder, because they're tearing out pages before the book is bloody, and then they're tearing out pages after the book is bloody. So looking at some of the other pages in those crime scene photos, and I would encourage people to look at all of the crime scene photos and look at the other Quran pages that were torn out but are not actually mentioned here. I don't see any blood on any of those other pages. So why would somebody rip out pages first and then, you know, get their hands bloody, and then rip out more pages, and then put one bloody page, item 10, all the way over here to the left of Camille, if we're looking at this this sketch that they've drawn here. I always thought that that was weird, that most of the Quran pages are actually next to David. And doesn't that show that somebody was ripping it out? I mean, why would they rip it out close to where David was? If this was a thing against Camille,
exactly.
Wouldn't they rip it out next to her? Wouldn't we see more pages, more bloody pages, definitely, next to Camille as opposed to David? Why is the Quran so close to David? Item 4 here.
I mean, exactly. And just because we can't see blood on any of the other pages, and the police should know this, and definitely the lab technicians that were there know this for sure. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it isn't there. There's blood, like if you are touching a surface with your fingertips, and say you have bloody fingertips, and you touch stuff, and to where eventually where the print is no longer visible, but that blood is still going to be on that item. You can't see it, but they can bring it up with different solutions. So again, it goes back to why, like Dan was saying, why weren't these, and you said it too, why didn't they document? Why were they not tested, photographed? They failed on so many areas. And one last thing here for the Quran, then we can move on if you guys want to, but it's pretty interesting what they did consider things worthy to document and what they didn't. Like with this image here, if you look at BCA 4764, they have documented this page here, and on top of the page is a huge piece of skull, or a huge piece of somebody's head, whatever you want to call it. This is a huge piece of flesh that's never mentioned, never documented, and I think if Catherine hadn't done so much great work on the whole blunt force trauma, I wouldn't have thought anything of it. And we were talking about things and why they weren't documented. I mean, this is obviously, this is a big one, because this is a huge piece of flesh, of somebody's skull, of somebody's head. And why isn't that documented? So it's very selective, not only in the pages, but just in the items that they choose to document, and the items that they don't ever mention. Exactly. I would have tested this. You could have clearly found out whose piece this was. I don't know. I agree.
Anything else on the Quran? I think we've covered about everything I wanted to cover here. I don't have any other notes on it.
Should I move on to the floor bloodstains on page 45?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, page 45, floor bloodstains. 7 blood swabs from the living room floor were labeled as item 13, 14, 15, 18, 19, 20, and 32. Of those submitted, only item 14 was tested for DNA. Then it shows a photo of the floor, and it says item 14 is one of the bloody footprints near the kitchen island counter. The DNA profile of this item matched Camille. David and Rania were excluded as contributors. A chemical was used to enhance any possible ridge detail of the footprint. It should be noted that none of the footprints found at the scene were conclusively tied to David or anyone else. So the source of the footprints remain inconclusive to this day. Item 29 is one of many small bloodstains on the east wall behind the recliner. The blood on the wall was swabbed but never examined to find a DNA source. The blood on the recliner, item 34, wasn't examined either, even though there was a huge blood stain on the bottom left corner. Considering the huge circular stain in the item in the image below, I was surprised authorities decided not to swab the item. And there's a photo there of the left cushion. It had blood on it, soaked all the way through, but no body was near or resting at that scene.
Now this photo is a little misleading only because this is where the recliner is in the reclined spot. So this is, they pull the little lever on the side of this recliner maybe to get a better photo of it. But this is what threw me off, because I was like, how does the blood stain get here? Where is this? And it's actually at the bottom of the floor. That's where this blood was found. And I think this proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that somebody's body was moved. A big blood stain like this does not get there unless somebody is bleeding out. Am I wrong on that?
Nope, you're right.
I agree 100%. In fact, it was someone's body, and more than likely someone's head was laying there as they were bleeding out. But when police arrived, there was no head near that recliner cushion. It was just sitting by itself with dried blood.
And what gets me about this photo is, like you said, Greg, this is where they pulled up the footrest. And when it was in the down position where they found it, where was the pooled blood under that recliner? There's so much blood right there, yet the rug underneath it is clean. And they never questioned it. That is a huge problem. They didn't test it, and they didn't question it.
Now, because of the lack of blood on this recliner in other areas, or maybe bad photos, whatever it is, does this show us that somebody wasn't necessarily shot there, but was probably maybe dragged there or put there and then they bled out? Because if they were shot in this area, that recliner should be full of a lot more blood, right?
Oh, there would be blood, there would be skull pieces, brain tissue, there would be everything all over that area, and it would be high velocity, not a soaking type of pattern. So, yeah, I don't, there's nothing there that shows to me, and again, I'm not an expert, but I have done a lot of study on this so far, but I don't see anything that resembles where someone was injured in that area. But yet, like you were saying, it is very plausible someone's body was leaned up against that portion of the recliner, and then therefore the leather soaked up that blood.
And just to clarify for the newer listeners out there, Camille her head was tucked up by the couch, or I'll call it the sofa. So she was kind of snug up by the sofa. The daughter, Rania, was laying between her legs, kind of at a perpendicular angle, really not next to any piece of furniture. David was laying in the middle of the floor, also not really too close to any piece of furniture. This image is a recliner that's soaked. This is not the couch. This is not the sofa. This is a recliner almost by the feet of where Rania was. A separate, isolated piece of furniture called the recliner, and this much blood was there. And so that's where I also get some questions too. They thought, well, that's probably where Camille's head came to rest, and we say no, that was the sofa. You know, there was a love seat there and a sofa put together like almost like a kind of a sectional thing. But this, I repeat, this is the standalone recliner that's in the middle of the room that had this amount of blood on it. And you're right, Greg, with the shooting, there would be blood spray, spatter all across this recliner. All we have is just soaking. So it's as if someone was shot or injured and their head came to fall or came to rest near that, and the person was bleeding out to cause that much soaking. But whoever that was moved because no one was found there. So then the question becomes, why or who did the moving? And if David was the one shot last, allegedly, it couldn't have been him. Couldn't have been his blood. So if the testing would have been done, this would be obviously Camille or Rania's blood. But if it came back that it was David's, then we have another problem. So I think that was either selectively not included or they didn't do the tests. Because there's a great picture of that recliner in the middle of the room next to the Christmas tree, not near the sofa, not near the sectional, but it had the single most item with the single most blood on it, other than some random spray or spatter on the hardwood floors that appears actually to be medium velocity spatter. But there was nothing on this recliner except the bottom corner that was soaked, so heavily soaked in blood. So someone died or was dying or was heavily injured at this location. But once again, authorities show up. They were in different spots than this. No one was within probably 2 or 3 feet of this recliner.
Yep.
Very strange. Should I continue on page 47, Greg?
Okay.
Top of page 47, it says, hair and small bloodstains were also present on the upper right portion of the recliner, but not mentioned in the reports. Another curious item in the living room was the blood stain on the south wall, just below the light switch, labeled item 33. This item was one of many blood spots on the wall closest to the front window. DNA tests were never performed on this item. Item 31 is a bullet fragment found near the south wall. The fragment was submitted as evidence into the nuclear DNA section of the BCA laboratory analysis request, but was never tested for results. Also found on the living room floor was a Surface Pro tablet labeled as AV-45. A year or so after the crime, I was able to ask Camille's sister Sidra about the tablet. Camille and Rani had a DVD player next to them, Sidra explained, which makes us believe they were watching a movie, and he came from the basement, end quote. Sidra suspected Camille and Rania were watching a movie on Netflix when they were killed. And then there's a photo of the Surface Pro. Page 48. My sister wrote down her feelings on her Surface Pro, quote, Sidra continued, if I can get into it, I can solve exactly why David did this and put an end to all these questions everyone has. She has a diary, end quote. At that time, Sidra did not believe police were able to bypass the password screen and gain full access to the device. I told her there was software she could buy to bypass the password and break into the computer. I was a little surprised that police told her they couldn't get past the password screen on the Surface Pro. Police couldn't without risking losing the information, Sidra responded. Police were eventually able to extract the data from the Surface Pro, according to Sidra. Just talk to my dad, she said. Sidra informed me. They couldn't get into the iPhone, but they did get into the Surface Pro, and they didn't find anything. When the alarms retrieved Camille's possessions from police, the SIM card for Camille's iPhone was missing. It's unclear if police removed the SIM card or if the card was missing when authorities collected the phone. Period.
There's a lot
Lots
to
there. Lots there.
Yeah, there's a whole lot to unpack.
I'm hearing a lot. There's probably a lot of people listening. But wait a minute. Hold on. Wait a minute. And that's exactly what, I mean, she got a lot of flack from when I posted this. She got a lot of flack for this stuff, and I was glad that she was able to talk to me and to give me this, to let me know her side, some of her thoughts. The fact that I guess I can, go back over some of those things there, but I guess just sticking with what she was saying, there's a lot of speculation here, and yet at the same time, I don't know where this is coming from. I think at that time the Gray State team were feeding her a lot of things, and were almost, I don't want to say treating her like a target individual might not be the right word. There's probably a better word, but they were, I can't even think of the word. They were not censoring her, but they were sheltering her, I guess, is kind of the only way that I can think of it. And later on, she did realize that they were full of shit. But I think at that time, she was listening to what they were telling her, and she was taking it seriously. And I'm just glad that she was able to listen to us, too, and to hear some of the alternative theories, more based on fact than just listening to a bunch of people that wanted to take David Crowley's project and make money off of it.
Yeah, that is good. And there's one thing I want, that it's not just Sidra, but a lot of people tend to think that if, like she was making the comment about the police would, accidentally get rid of information if they try to access it. That's not true. They make copies of hard drives, and then they work from the copies where the actual device itself is never in jeopardy of being damaged. So, that was never going to happen. They had plenty, they could make as many attempts as they wanted to without ever damaging the original device. But, oh my goodness, there's just so much to cover in this last portion of your chapter.
Well, we can start in the middle of 45 there. Catherine, I've got a question for you. Of the blood swabs, there was 7 things were taken for blood swabs and submitted. Only one of them was tested for DNA. So number one, is that correct? Would they typically test them all, or just pick one, or why was it only one was tested for DNA?
What they should, what I have seen done, and I don't know if this is across the board, but you would think it should be. If they're collecting items and blood swabs from the same vicinity, they would only generally take one swab and test that because it's all right there. But when you have blood coming from one wall 4 or 5 feet away, another wall 6 feet away, another area 3 feet away, they should test that individually because they don't know. It's coming from different areas of the house. They have no idea whose blood that is. They have 3 victims, blood on almost every wall, but yet they only test one particular item? Does not make sense. And I remember reading the email exchange between Joe Cooksley and I forget which officer it was. They're like, okay, do you want me to test? And they quoted more than just one. And that came back saying, no, don't worry about it right now. We'll just test just this one. And they're like, well, okay, So they were prepared. The lab itself was prepared to test, but it came back from the police department, no, only test one.
It also seems like the crime technicians, the crime scene techs, were doing their job. They were getting the swabs. They were collecting all the evidence. And then when it got handed over then to the next chain of command to do the testing, it's at that point they either said no or didn't want to do it or weren't interested in doing it. But it seems like the crime lab techs that were there did actually do their jobs in this case. They were getting all of these samples and submitting them. And at that point their job is done, right? Then somehow once we get it to the testing, decisions are being made then by various people that the 3 of us, I guess, don't necessarily believe were accurate or correct. But the crime scene techs were at least collecting what they needed to collect. Did they not?
Yes. Well, they collected a lot of the blood, and if they didn't collect it, I mean, at least they were documenting it. I don't recall seeing a collection of the blood drops on the dishwasher. Now, I could be wrong. It's like I said, I don't have all of my stuff with me. In fact, I don't have anything with me in front of me because it's still packed away in boxes. But they should have tested gathered and tested the blood drop on the floor, the blood drop inside the dishwasher, which I don't believe was ever done. They should have tested the blood on the smear, the transfer on the wall next to Ronia's bedroom. I mean, but yet So did the crime techs, did they get those swabs? I don't think they did. I don't think they got all of them, but it's evident that they were really trying because there was so much there. I don't see that they were trying to avoid things on purpose, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I don't think it was nefarious on their part, but yeah, for the most part, I see they really were trying to do their job.
Yeah, they didn't test any of that. They didn't. If you look at the nuclear DNA report, yeah, they didn't. That's not even listed. So only item 14 is listed, which would make sense why, out of all of those ones that we mentioned, only 14 is tested here, because it was the only.
Yeah, and I still have yet to see somebody's toes look like that. I am sorry, I will never believe those are footprints. I have never seen toes that look like that, especially look at the one with the circle with the long line going down it. It's like, no, that's not a footprint. But especially the blood drops in the kitchen and in the dishwasher. Those are passive. That means someone was bleeding on the way. And was that to the sink or somewhere around that dishwasher? Can't even remember what the kitchen looks like now.
There's one on the floor of the dishwasher.
Correct.
Next to the floor, and then there was one inside of the dishwasher.
Correct.
And both of those were from straight above. They were perfect cylinders.
Yes,
so passive, as Catherine was saying.
Yes. So those definitely should have been swabbed and tested without question. But I don't even think they were swabbed.
No, they weren't. They're not even listed. They're not listed as, no.
And then the ones tested on the floor of the alleged footprints, they came back and said that those were Camille's, and that makes sense. That's probably was Camille's blood. But our question is, whose footprint was it? Who tracked in the footprint, if indeed it is a footprint? And so they say that Camille had socks on, Rania didn't, and David was sockless. So they said it must have been David's footprint, but we never see any other secondary test from David's foot or a photo of David's foot showing that he indeed had blood on his feet to even conclude it was a footprint. So we don't even know, like Catherine said, if it was a footprint, but what they did was see what looked to be a footprint, saw that David had no socks on, and came to the conclusion that it must have been his footprint. Well, the question is, who put it there? We know it was Camille's blood. If it was a footprint, whose footprint is it? We still don't have the answer. Was it even a footprint? So the question is, how did it get there, whatever it was?
Yeah,
and
can
so
you go
that's
back?
what we're not getting.
I'm sorry, Greg, could you go back to that one photo you just had of 21? And it looks like there are actually 3 passive drops of blood on the floor, and they only point to 1. Yeah, right there. Can you zoom in a little bit more on the 21 arrow?
Yeah, and this is BCA 4881. Let's zoom in there. And on the 21 arrow, right?
Yeah, actually there's quite a bit of blood on that floor. Look at that. And that's passive for sure. So why did they not test that? That looks like someone was walking, and as they're walking, they're dripping blood. Wow.
The closest blood to the dishwasher would be the blood found on David's cell phone. I mean, there's really no other blood in this area of this kitchen or anywhere like that.
Yeah, nor should there be. And yeah, and I'm sorry, that just caught my eye when I was looking at that. I'm like, wait a second, there are 3 drops of blood, not just 1. I, for some reason, was only remembering 1 drop of blood on the floor, but there are clearly 3 right there. So, and that shows an active passive walking pattern where somebody is walking and they're dripping as they're walking.
Interesting.
But yeah, and like Dan was saying, it's like, it still boggles my mind where they're blaming David. Yeah, look at that. Right there in the dishwasher.
Yeah, one little drop. Let me see if I can zoom in on that.
Yeah. Look at that.
And this is BC.
So that's straight down, as Catherine was saying. Some have thought that maybe during the gunfire from the living room, this is part of a splatter that went flying and landed there. What we're trying to say is that this is someone standing above, dripping straight down.
Correct.
that's not even in an oblong position.
Right.
It's straight down. So this is someone standing there, someone bleeding, or someone dripping someone else's blood. But until we know whose it is, we don't know. And so this was not tested, correct?
Exactly. Exactly. And like you said, what they should look for when you look at some of the drops of blood on the floor in the living room would be those little satellites, those little parts that just kind of spurt out. And that you see none of that. Like you said, it's like straight down.
And so if they tested this and the results came back that it was neither of the 3 Crowley family members, then we'd have another person of interest. And so what we don't get is the test results on these to confirm that it was one of the 3. And if so, who was bleeding? And why were they over by walking around by the dishwasher? And so that's the kind of questions that we...
Oh, what happened to Dan?
Okay.
Did we lose Dan?
I think we
here we go. And we all believe they're fair questions. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But some of the resistance that we get are people saying, why are you asking these questions? Who cares whose blood it is? Why do you care if there's blood in the dishwasher or on the kitchen floor? And what we're trying to get across to people is that it doesn't make sense. Who was walking around? Who was bleeding? Why were they standing there? Who does this belong to? And because it wasn't tested, only raises that question.
Exactly, and in cases like this, if there is another person, which we believe they were murdered, so the murderer, generally in cases like this, it's indicative to the police that there was someone else walking around. So if you have all of the victims in the living room and no real amount of blood in the kitchen, but yet except for these drops, that should have set off little alarm bells in their head, right? They should have said, there was a perpetrator in here dripping blood, so whose blood is it? We need to find out. Was there another person here? But they didn't do any of that.
Going through some of the photos here, just so people can get a clearer view of those prints, the prints that are found.
Yeah, and what cracks me up too is there's a lot of blood in these prints. I mean, a lot. But yet there's nothing leading up to or walking away from. They're just stuck in the middle of the floor.
How is that possible?
It's not. It absolutely is not.
I mean, were some of the other ones maybe wiped down and the killers missed these 2, or any thoughts on that?
And we do get a lot of questions of this from new folks as members of the group. They'll say, obviously it was David, his footprint was there. Why are you guys spending so much time on all this? And the point is that we're trying to say, like Catherine said, is there are not 2 or 3 footprints leading up to that counter. There are not 5 or 6 footprints. There's 1. And there's no bloody footprints getting there, from the living room rug to that counter. So the question is, why is there only 1? So it looks like it's staged. Once again, key word being staged. Why is there a bloody footprint there? How did it get there?
And it's only the supposed right foot. And when you look at the pattern of how these so-called prints are on the floor, I mean, again, I'm sorry I have to laugh at this. It is just like kindergarten art. I have never, ever seen a toe with a long line. When you look at the big spot that I guess is supposed to be the quote-unquote big toe, but then the next toe, you see a circular dot, which is made, if you dip your finger in paint or blood or whatever and you just press it down and lift it up, it makes that same exact pattern. But that long line that goes from that circular pattern down toward what is supposed to be the ridge, I'm pointing at my screen. I'm sorry, I can't see what I'm pointing at. Sorry about that. But show me, yes, thank you, that portion right there. Nobody's toe does that. So I'm just like, that is a really weird foot.
And going to your point, Catherine, if this was manipulated, if someone's hand did this, there would be fingerprints left behind. And so if someone had a glove or a latex glove on, dipped their hand in and did these drawings to make it look like feet, that's probably more than likely what did happen. So the question is, who put these there and why? Now, we know why is to make it look like this is David doing it. But the question is, was there blood on David's feet, particularly his right foot? We know he didn't have a sock or a shoe on. It would have been easy to test to say, yes, there was blood. In fact, this blood on the floor, matches the blood found on his foot. It would have been dried blood. But we don't get that. We don't get a photograph of his foot. We don't get a report saying, we looked at his foot and there was no blood on it at all.
Exactly.
We don't get a report that says there's blood on both feet. And then the question would be, why isn't there left-footed prints on that hardwood floor? All we see is two right-footed prints. And so the question is, it wasn't David's footprints, although, fact, he wasn't wearing socks or shoes. That is a fact. But was there blood on his right foot to contribute to making that? That's what we would like to get a conclusive answer from with the detectives, to say, yes, we found some blood footprints on the hardwood floor, and it subsequently matched the bloody foot of his unsocked foot. Nothing was there. So now we've connected A to B, and therefore we conclude C. That's what we're not getting here, and that's where the frustration comes in from. Yes, an elementary detective would look and see blood footprints and see that he did it, and assume that he killed his family, then ultimately killed himself. Yes, we get that. That's what was intended for the first responders to see, to come to that conclusion. But if it's staged, you've got to look at every single piece of evidence, and that looks like to us was never done on any of this stuff.
Exactly.
And when I first saw those prints, I thought that those prints would actually lead up to the laptop, and then David wrote whatever he wrote, but they don't. They're actually closer to where David's bloody cell phone is. But then again, it goes back, okay, so then when David, or when whoever was writing on the laptop, they didn't have bloody feet at that point. But then later on, they do. And I was trying to use that as a timeline to figure out, okay, we have three notes here. We have the blood writing wall, we have the note in the bedroom, and then we have the typed note on this laptop. Which one comes first? Which one comes second? Which one comes last? The fact that there's no blood prints leading up to the laptop, yet the hands, there's bloody handprints or bloody prints on the actual laptop. It's just more strange stuff. It's just, there's blood here, there's blood there, but there's no rhyme, there's no reason to it. There's just, there's no blood leading, no prints leading into that bedroom. It's just strange.
Yeah, and they don't explain either, because that is a lot of blood that would have to be on a hand to touch that phone. A lot of blood that would have to be to leave the amount of blood prints on the Quran. A lot of blood that's on a lot in the sense of more than expected if it were simply gunshot wounds. If David had done this and just shot them each in the head, why is there blood on his hand? Yes, they're saying that, he wrote on the wall, but then also, if there are bloody, quote-unquote, bloody footprints on the floor, and he's moving around and doing all this stuff, walking up and down stairs, there would be, quote-unquote, real bloody footprints all over that floor, or floors, plural, and the carpet, on the rug, in the kitchen, going down the stairs. But yet there's only two of the supposed right foot in front of the island. Just none of this is making sense.
I would like to jump ahead to the Surface Pro, if I could.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
I've got several questions on the Surface Pro. One is, we see a photo of it closed on item 45. But Sidra goes out of her way to say it makes us think that they were watching a movie or watching a Netflix, a DVD when the shooting took place. So why wouldn't there be a photo of the Surface Pro open showing blood spatter on the open computer? Then we would know that it was in an open position when the shootings took place. If there's no blood on the inside of it, we can rule that out, because if there's no blood spatter on the inside of the Surface Pro, we would know that the cover would not have been opened. So she is the sister here. This is Sidra saying more likely they were watching a movie on Netflix with the DVD player. Well, that is certainly plausible, but all we would need is a photo of the case open or closed to prove that was the case or not. Next is if they were streaming a movie on Netflix, I'm sure the investigators would have contacted Netflix with the user account to see when that movie was streamed, who was watching it, and when did that movie end, and what date were they watching the movie. This would certainly help come up with a timeline that we still need. We still don't have a timeline.
Right.
Now, back then, so there's the top of it, but not the inside of it, which means it may very well have been closed. If the Surface Pro was closed, we can throw any concept of them watching a movie or a Netflix DVD out the window, because that was not the case. But we don't know because we don't have an image of the interior of the Surface Pro. Now, we have to keep in mind that back then, 2014, that Netflix was still common to receive these discs in the mail, watch them, and then return them again. You actually get the DVD hard copy. Here we are 5, 6 years later, and most people just stream them. You're not getting the actual DVDs in the mail. So the question is this: the Surface Pro, if it had a DVD-ROM player, what was in the DVD-ROM? What movie were they watching? We've never seen that. Sidra got the Surface Pro back. Was there or was there not a DVD inserted? What were they in the middle of watching? If there was nothing in there, they weren't watching anything.
Right.
So the question is, the response from Sidra that she provided to Greg was a lot of suppositions of what she thought took place, but only there's no evidence whatsoever. They got that Surface Pro back. They could have ejected the CD and said, oh, they were watching this Disney movie. Or there could have been reminders in the mail coming from Netflix saying that this following movie was never been returned for months. Right?
Right.
If they were watching a movie and they were all killed, wouldn't Netflix have been giving them late charges about the movie? And so it's questions like that that we do not have. It's questions like that that we do not get answers to.
Well, and too, I want to make note that if that laptop there was found, okay, look at that, right? If you could keep it right there, if that is blood, which it probably could very well be, on top of that, what that pattern does not suggest that it was on its side, leaning against the couch when it was hit with the blood, like that. There is no dripping down of the blood spatter on that Surface Pro. Look at that. It's just like it was lying flat on the ground with the lid closed, or wherever it was, when whatever material that is landed on top of it. And then, because when it's shown next to the couch, you're assuming that right there, that is the in situ position. That Surface Pro, it looks to be lying on a piece of paper that was chewed up by a dog or something else. So that looks to have been placed long after the bodies were in that position. So who came in and put that there? It was dried blood or whatever on top of it, and then it was then taken and moved and leaned up against the couch on top of, looks to be either chewed up and spit out, or, because I can't tell from, but it's sitting on top of something that it should not be on top of something if it were lying there prior to that book being torn apart.
And this would have been closest to where David's feet were too.
Correct.
Not really, and closest to the knife. And we see those blue blankets in the left corner. Those blue blankets were down on the floor too. So there's a possibility that this Surface Pro was actually moved. Obviously at some point it had to be moved. Maybe they tried to put it back how they found it. But if the blue blankets were there, it's hard. I don't know. It doesn't really give us a good idea of where it was found.
Well, not to be rude, crude, and offensive, but the one photo that shows the bodies is the Surface Pro? Is that what it's called?
Surface with an F.
Surface. Okay, Surface Pro. Is it leaning up against the sofa in that photo?
I don't know if we can see it from that one.
Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah, I'm curious now, too, to see if we can actually see it in that photo. And then in some of the other photos where the knife was, too, I think that would be another good one to
Yeah, because right there, look, it's on top of paper.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And
so right there it tells them that someone else came in after they were all dead.
And after somebody put the paper... Shattered.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it was after they were all dead, because that is crumpled paper. It looks damaged and probably walked on by an animal. And with a chewed up piece of scarf next to it, that was placed way after the bodies were there. So, I mean, this is what I'm saying. There are so many aspects that if the police just looked at one of them, they would have known that this was a triple homicide.
Well said. Anything else?
Now I've got one last step here, then I got to run in a few minutes. It relates to the password, the hard drive, the phone, all these things that investigators took and how the family received them. Now all we hear is that the Apple Valley Police Department returned the phone with the SIM card missing. They returned the Surface Pro without being able to access it. But we know that these things, because they're electronic in nature, were sent to the Dakota County Electronic Crimes Unit to be investigated, which is not part of Apple Valley Police Department, but it's part of the Electronic Crimes Unit. So they would have been given to all these IT professionals to be able to look at the last activity on the Surface Pro, look at the phone to see when the last texts and calls were made, those types of things. Now the answer we get back was, we couldn't get into the Surface Pro because we did not know the password. Well, I have an IT background, and I know that is BS right off the bat. Now, I can see that a detective saying that I couldn't get in because of the password. But when you give it to the Electronic Crimes Unit of the Dakota County, that's what they specialize in, they can open up that Surface Pro, take the hard drive out, and see what was on the hard drive, regardless of the password itself.
Exactly.
So was that just the police department saying, oh, I guess we couldn't get into it, and the Electronic Crimes Task Force looked into it and maybe found nothing of significant value, and then that's just how the Apple Valley Police interpreted it?
That makes a lot of sense.
That's wrong altogether. It's just telling the family, oh, we couldn't get into it. Well, that's not only wrong, it's incorrect on so many levels. Now, the phone, you may have taken the SIM card out to do research, but you would certainly return it back with it in. And now this just raises more and more questions as far as a cover-up is involved. Now, this was reduced or removed as far as a question when Sidra later said that they did say it was their mistake and they mailed the SIM card to them. So that could be an honest-to-goodness simple mistake. Well, I find it still highly irregular that would even happen. So I'll leave it at that, but the password, we couldn't get in. We couldn't get in the contents. That Surface Pro found at the scene, along with a phone, would be able to provide the detectives with a clear timeline. When it was last used, when would it last access the internet, when was the last email retrieved, when did the battery die? Was it still plugged in? Was a movie watched? Were they surfing the web? All those things, they'd be able to have a crisp, firm timeline of when the activity stopped. Not to say when the crimes were committed, but when we know a time in a line in the sand that when it was ended, when the crime ended, we'd have a timeline for that.
Right.
And so that was never done because they gave the simple excuse that we couldn't get in it. The phone, well, we didn't know, but here's the phone back and it's missing a SIM card. Well, we've already looked into the AT&T phone records and found out that what the family members were telling police as far as the most recent text and the texting activity doesn't line up with what actually happened. And so we already know that there are lies from family members of the Crowley family to law enforcement as far as sending texts, last texts to the family in the final months. After looking at the records ourselves, we know that those texts, incoming texts, were not done and were not delivered, and those phone calls were not made. And so, once again, the Surface Pro would probably be able to provide more, but conveniently enough, we do not have that. So, it's very frustrating as we see this. Now, Sidra doesn't help herself. This is the Sidra. Sidra is his sister, sorry. By saying that it looks like they were watching a movie when David came up from the basement to kill them. Well, that is another planted story or an opinion of what may or may not happen. We already know from the evidence that that's not what happened. There was no bullet found from David, and David didn't commit the murders. So the question is, how did they die? That's fair enough to have an opinion of what she thinks happened, but once again, Greg, you mentioned earlier that Sidra was doubting a lot of this, and it didn't really make sense. And then she flew to Minneapolis and met with the guys in the Gray State, and by the time they met, and by the time she left, they had all taken her back to the airport, and were all best friends on Facebook the week after that. And she was singing a very different tune, saying David did do this, and now the case is closed. So what you have is a very vulnerable suspect sister that is dealing and spending time with highly controllable people that are very manipulative. And what we see now later in the aftermath is she cut off all ties with these folks after that, once she found out that she was being led astray anywhere. But it's the level of deception, it's the lies that really gets us to where we are here today.
Right, and like you were saying earlier, Dan, to tie it all together, what you were saying at the beginning, it's layers. They were very good at creating layers of deception. And
yep,
of course,
sooner or later you're going to spend enough time on layer 1, and then you're going to spend time on layer 2, and by the time you get to layer 3, well, I've got a family, I've got a job to go to, I don't have time to research this, and then you lose interest. And with the 3,800 of us left, where we don't buy that situation, we have looked into it. It doesn't jive.
Right.
And so we know something's up, and now the question is, after sending things to the Dakota County Sheriff's Department, the Minnesota Attorney General, the Apple Valley Police Department, they have this information. They have the inconsistencies. And we're talking dozens of inconsistencies. Right. And so nothing's coming from it. What is the question? Is it a cover-up, or did it become a cover-up? But it's not what it is. It's all that we know is that it is not what the official narrative is, and therefore the official narrative is incorrect or wrong. The question then is, what really happened? And my biggest problem, and I got to take off here in a few minutes, is that the killers and the perpetrators of this family are still out there walking free to this day, and this is a heinous crime scene. Yeah. That's what we need to keep in. That's what we need to keep in mind. These people are still out there, and this wasn't done by one person.
Yep, I agree with you, and that is the disconcerting factor is when you look at everything that we're looking at right now, the blood, the pages of the Quran, and what should or should not be there, what they did and did not test. And it's so evident that there were multiple murders in this case. And how can any of them feel safe knowing that their family is also exposed to these killers? You know, I don't understand how they could easily just walk away and be part of or help to keep a cover-up going. I don't understand.
I agree. All right, guys, I gotta run. I'll see you guys next time.
Okay, thanks,
All right.
Dan.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Catherine.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Dan.
Bye.
All right, Catherine, unless you have any other, any final points here, we can go ahead and shut this one down.
No, that was all I had to say. So I'm done if you're done.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, and I look forward to coming back here. And next month we're going to be talking about the kitchen. So we'll go over all the things that we found in that kitchen. So I hope you'll be able to join us again for that one. And
That'd be great.
Next time, this is episode number 9 of the Gray Stage podcast. Even though on the title it says by Greg Fernandez Jr., it's really a collective effort from everybody who has helped me, everyone who has been tolerant of me, been tolerant of my views, some of my short-sightedness at certain points. But you know, I am always willing to say that I'm wrong with this case. I've been wrong many times, and I have no problem with that. As long as I can get to the truth, that is what matters. And I think for many of us, many of the 3,800 people we have in the Justice for David Crowley and Family Facebook group, that is the purpose. It's not about proving our theory. It's not about, you know, thinking that we are right. It is just about finding truth and finding justice, getting justice for this family. And I think that we continue to get justice. We always win. We have won. We continue to win as long as we don't give up, as long as we just keep on searching for justice, searching for answers, searching for truth. You know, we are getting justice for this family by not letting this case die, because there is something very strange going on here. And more than likely, there are some killers out there. And as we know, you kill once, chances are you're going to slip up. And hopefully we'll be there to catch them in that. So God bless you all. Thank you again, Catherine. And I will shut this down until next time.